Today, I'd like to try to set out an understanding of why, if you are struggling with overwhelm, overreactivity, and generally suffering from stress and tension caused by a life that perhaps is too fastly paced, why practicing intense forms of yoga may actually be taking you in a direction away from peace and away from calmness. Now, I know that in the modern world and in the modern yoga scene, talking about this can sometimes be a little bit controversial. And that is not really my intention, but really it's to try to, based actually on the teachings and the insight of Sri T. Krishnamacharya, to explain actually why some of the traditional teachings, before they became infused with some of the more modern values of the world, were actually more beneficial in terms of creating a long-term path towards establishing ourselves in a more peaceful and stable and balanced state. So there are a few things that I'd like to explain in relation to this. So the first one is that in classical yoga, and this is the yoga of Patanjali, which was the yoga that was really practiced and taught by Krishnamacharya, there was no confusion between whether yoga was for physical exercise or whether yoga was actually for the purpose of mental transformation and liberation from, or liberating us from dukkha or suffering. It was understood very clearly as presented in the Yoga Sutras, as presented in the Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga, that yoga is a pathway that gradually takes us towards an inner state of more peace. It was understood that the body, therefore, was used as a tool to help settle the breath and to help settle the mind, and to use the body as an anchor for the mind. That is to say, although, yes, of course, there are definitely physiological benefits to practicing yoga, the idea was not to practice yoga in order to gain those side effects or those byproducts. The idea was to use the body to the extent that it was necessary in order to cultivate new samskara or patterns in the mind, as well as to create new sensations in the body and to shift the inner state or feeling. Now, in that regard, in modern times, what we often find is that very, very physically demanding practices are offered to people even at a beginner level of when they're starting out practicing asana. Now, the reason that I'm mentioning this is because one of the 2 key things that are mentioned in the Yoga Sutra and were key to Krishnamacharya's teaching was that, number 1, when we practice asana, there should be both a state of sthira and sukha when we practice stability as well as ease. Secondly, when we breathe, whether it be in asana or whether it be in our pranayama or breathwork practices, the breath should be dirgha, long, and sukshma, subtle. So if we think of it like this, as a practitioner, we can develop our asana practice, our physical practice, to the extent that, for example, we could hold downward dog, or we could hold a supported headstand or shoulder stand for maybe 12 or 24 breaths. At the right moment and at the right time in our practice, we should be able to do that without breaking sweat, with a long, slow, stable breath, and at the same time cultivating these states of stability as well as ease within the body. One of the things that Krishnamacharya used to do throughout his students' practice was to take their pulse, and that was again to check that they weren't overexerting themselves. Now, the reason for this is quite clear in relation to classic yoga philosophy and also the teachings of Krishnamacharya, which is that the pathway of Hatha Yoga is to become more and more intimate with more and more inwardly subtle sensations in the body. If we practice something that is overly intense for our own capacity, which causes our heart rate to increase, our pulse rate to increase, which causes us to overexert ourselves, What that means is that we are remaining locked in the superficial layers of sensation within the body. At the same time, it means that our breath is going to be working overtime, which means that the breath will not be long, slow and subtle. It will be short, it will be laboured, it will be too intense. And again, that experience will be intense, activating the nervous system. In order to be calm and peaceful, we need a calm nervous system. If we are used to living a life where we're moving at pace, moment to moment, where we're constantly absorbing stress and tension from around us, and also because of the way that our mind is relating to situations around us, we're going to be constantly in a state of feeling triggered and tense and stressed. We bring that into our practice, and again, we mirror that because we're doing fast, intense practices, which again mirror that same state that we find ourselves in more often than not in our lives. So Krishnamacharya was essentially saying that number one, you need to move slowly and mindfully to notice what's going on, but also so as not to overexert yourself, so as not to activate the nervous system and the mind. Similarly, a long, slow breath is the indicator as to whether we are practicing within our capacity, but at the same time, a long, slow breath is also sending a signal to our body and also to our mind that things are calm, things are stable, and things are balanced. Now, returning to the pathway of Hatha Yoga, what's also important to understand is that gradually we work with more and more subtle sensations, and our asana practice is just an entry point to take us into the deeper limbs of yoga, like breath work or pranayama, like withdrawal of the senses, and then the final three antarangas, the inner limbs of yoga, being concentration, meditation, and absorption. By making use of our body in a more gentle way, we begin to tune into the more subtle sensations deeper within the body, no longer being masked by the muscular sensations on the externalities of the body. As a result of this, as we deepen our Hatha Yoga practice over time and we move into pranayama, we're dealing with even more subtle sensations, which is also why he taught that we should never feel strained when we're doing pranayama, because again, that's going to take us to a more externalized experience of sensation rather than a more internalized experience of sensation. As we deepen further still, we start to notice the subtle sensations pulsing through the body, but the next stage of Hatha Yoga is actually then to limit our awareness, limit our focus to very, very specific areas of the body, and for those sensations to become even more subtle, yet even more intense. And this is also the paradox, is that actually the intensity of what we feel becomes much, much greater when we are able to focus our minds more fully on the subtle sensations within, rather than superficially intensifying the practice in order to penetrate often the dullness of our senses, because they've been so over-laboured in connection to sensory experiences externally in the world, that we need, or we think we need, that intensity of practice to even penetrate into our awareness. The idea is that over time, as we practice, we cleanse the senses become more subtle again, and therefore they are able to experience profound intensity or profound absorption, even from the most gentle inner states, which is why often when we first begin practicing and we're asked to feel the sensations in the heart space, many students report that they don't feel anything at all. Now, that's not because there's nothing going on there. It's due to the fact that their senses have become so numbed and need such intensity of external experience to feel anything, that when they turn their minds and their attention into a subtle space, it takes a long time for them to begin to tune into the fact that there's even anything going on there at all. So this is why over time, it's really important that we are aware of the fact that yoga is a movement towards the subtle, towards the gentle, towards the still. And if we get locked into a pattern of over-exerting ourselves in asana, we are actually losing the opportunity to move deeper into the inner limbs of yoga. As a result of that, coming back to what I said right at the beginning of this session, of this talk, is that if our goal for yoga is truly to bring about peace and to truly bring about transformation in the mind, then we must be really clear and careful with ourselves about what we are compromising and what we are sacrificing by going for physically intense practices. Now, it's not to say that those physically intense practices won't have some form of benefit, But the problem is that at some point we're going to get stuck there. Not necessarily stuck because our ego wants to just keep doing those practices, but stuck in the sense that we will no longer have access to the more subtle limbs of yoga, which require a change in pace, which require more patience, which require us to slow down, which require us to be able to sit still for longer and longer periods of time, which becomes more and more challenging if the way that we're practicing is mirroring the restless pace and experience of life that we are sitting with more often than not throughout each and every day. Yoga is ultimately about transforming the patterns of the mind. The patterns of the mind are created by karma, created by actions in our lives, which cause the mind to groove into certain patterns and repeat those patterns over and over again. If we want to calm the mind, we need to do things with the body, with the breath, and with the senses that help to calm them more and more deeply over a long period of time. That is why, if we want that and we want that to be our focus, we must really be aware of what we're doing when we might get stuck in more physically intense practices. For me personally, as many of you know, when I started to slow down my practice and when I really started to practice in this tradition of Shriti Krishnamacharya, I found that I made the most number of leaps or bounds forward in terms of my own mental well-being and my own inner peace, as I realized that so much of my physical practice prior to that was really me striving, and as a result of that, creating an activated nervous system, an activated mind, an exhaustion after the practice, rather than learning how to guide myself slowly but surely towards self-regulation, so that by the time I came to breath practice, by the time I came to meditation, I was really able to work at those subtle levels of the mind and create new patterns in the mind which have allowed, to a certain extent, some shift in the way that I experience life. So as always, I'm very keen to hear your thoughts and reflections on this talk. If you've liked this video, please give the video a like, and if you like the content on this channel in general, please do subscribe. Thank you for listening.